Hi everyone, welcome to a brand new episode of the Behold podcast on the Genre Equality channel. I'm Hitzir,
I'm Isa.
and this week we're going to be talking about something a little different. No plot-driven things, entirely character-driven, naturalistic, vérité, as the French call it, slice of life films, such as Nomadland, which is probably going to sweep the Oscars. A couple of days after this episode, is released,
Mhm.
as well as her previous film, The Rider, which is, in my opinion, a little stronger than Nomadland, but we can debate that a bit later.
Yeah.
Together with a couple of other similar slice of life as films, naturalistic, humanistic films. Hirokazu Kore-eda's Shoplifters,
hmm
alongside Sean Baker's The Florida Project. I loved all four of his films because there's a certain like fly on the wall quality to it, a certain organicness and non-contrivance, that evokes empathy and compassion
Yeah.
through through depicting the seemingly mundane, but what is our lives, but mostly mundane things,
hmm
and which is kind of why like I was so drawn to these films, despite the fact that there is a certain barrier I feel to liking it. Like
Yeah.
films like this might not be to everyone's tastes. Me, for example, obviously everyone growing up, right, are drawn to stories. So you start with plot driven things, right?
hmm
I like murder mysteries, for example. When you start off, and then as I started to become like interested in writing, I became interested in dialogue. Because I wanted to write dialogue, so I went for like the Before Sunrises and like the Aaron Sorkins and stuff like that.
yeah.
But I think like where I've evolved in my appreciation for cinema or storytelling in general, novels, comics, or whatever, is more down to earth, super grounded, naturalistic, slice of life kind of stuff that feels that they almost aren't narrative so much as docu-fiction. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. For sure. For sure.
Yeah, like what about you? Do you like coming into these films, like was there a barrier for you to appreciating this, or was is there like a point where something clicked for you, or I don't know, what was your like thought process like?
I think for these four individual films, definitely there were scenes that were like aha moments for me, right? Like just like, oh
Mm-hmm.
wow, okay. Like I
Mm-hmm.
understand the approach they were taking. And I think like Chloe Zhao in particular with the first two films we're gonna talk about has
Yeah.
this amazing eye for those moments, right? And we'll delve into those individually as we go along.
Yeah.
But I think my journey was a little different from yours.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, when a lot of the time when you say slice of life, right? Like to me, slice of life like immediately brings to mind kind of like anime,
Mm.
like as a particular kind of genre. But it took me a long time in my own anime watching, right, to get to the point whereby like really naturalistic slice of life stuff like
Mm.
well, I can't even name, there are a couple and we'll probably do an episode on that. um
Yeah.
where literally nothing happens but everyday life. It took me many years to kind of get to that point, right? Like kind of similar to
Mm-hmm.
you. And I
Mm-hmm.
think with films, it also maybe not as much of not so much the same trajectory as yours, kind of moving from like story to dialogue and all of that.
Yeah.
But we have covered a fair bit of this. I think like Honeyland was the most recent one that we did. That
Although that
really,
was an actual documentary.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So like no stranger to these, but like it
Yep.
doesn't make up the large bulk of the things that I watch, right? But
Mm.
still thoroughly enjoyed these four films.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely riveting, despite the fact that by a lot of people's kind of measure, like nothing actually happens, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the whole idea of slice of life is to present, a seemingly arbitrary sequence of events in a character's life. Like,
Yeah.
often it lacks plot development or conflict or exposition, and it tends to have an open ending, but like therein, comes the phrase, it's a slice of life. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it takes a while to get to like that. Like I would like give an analogy, like for me, right, like when I started like covering music at first,
Yeah.
like I was into band stuff, like
Yeah.
verse chorus structure and stuff like that. Like, and then like I came to like techno became like my thing,
Uh-huh.
you know. And like, like oftentimes when I first got into techno, like there's nothing happening, it's just like the same thing over and over again. And then like there's a moment where it clicks for you.
Yeah.
Like I don't know how to explain it, but like there was a moment when slice of life films clicked for me, like, and I think like going into like French films, like especially the ones from the 60s and 70s, like the Truffaut stuff.
Oh wow.
Um, the French New Wave, they're all like vérité films, like the Bicycle Thieves and 400 Blues
Hmm.
and stuff like that. But it has since gone out of style.
Yeah.
What's interesting over the last 4 or 5 years, which is when all these films came back, is that I think like there is a new wave, a new French New Wave, in other countries,
Yeah.
which I find fascinating.
Yeah, yeah. What do you think that is actually, right? Like, is it like? I mean, obviously, Zhao and her current kind of like stint in the limelight and what she's doing,
Hmm.
definitely brings that genre to the kind of like forefront, right? Like this new wave of new wave.
Yeah.
But even then, like Florida Project was a couple of years ago. Shoplifter was what 2018, 2017, right? These two films.
Hmm. Hmm.
What do you think? Like, is the kind of shift towards a greater prominence of slice of life naturalistic films?
Personally, I think like in the 2000s and the early 2010s, there was a shift towards making things more complex, and
Yeah.
I don't mean that in a bad thing. Like you think of like stuff like Memento,
Uh
or
huh.
you think of Charlie Kaufman's films, stuff like that. You try to make your narratives as interwoven. There was a huge slew of like Guy Ritchie type films where there are like eight different plot lines, coming together, blah blah blah.
Yeah.
And I think like they've taken that to the zenith, to the nth degree. Like the arms race is unsustainable in terms of making a story so complex to the point where it turns off the viewer.
Yeah.
Cough, cough, duck, cough, cough. Uh,
Yeah.
so I think like the best way is just strip it back to basics.
Okay. Okay. Yeah. Like
Yeah.
keep it simple with just the
Hmm.
camera
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
actors. Oh well, some non actors in as we're about to discuss.
A lot of non-actors. I mean, like I suppose we should begin with what is currently the Oscar frontrunner, as it should be,
Yes.
Chloe Zhao's Nomadland. Interestingly, the future director of the Eternals. Will
Yeah.
be.
I don't know how that's gonna work, right? Like I adore her work.
Yeah.
I'm very curious to see her first film, Songs My Brother Taught Me, because I
Also
haven't
very good.
I haven't got that yet. But like if
Yep.
they're all in this same vein, I really don't know how Eternals is gonna go, right? Like
Same.
it is
Yeah.
such a far departure from that. I
Hmm.
feel like with other directors that Marvel has tapped, with that kind of went from indie darling status to the
Hmm.
big box office stars they are. You kind of can see the link with that, but with Chloe Zhao, I'm not really sure.
Yeah, right. Like Taika Waititi and Thor Ragnarok was totally Taika Waititi. He didn't change his style at all.
Yeah,
Similarly with Ryan Coogler and Black Panther, right?
yeah.
But with Chloe Zhao, I think she will have to change his style to fit with the MCU
I
formula. You,
yeah.
you know what I mean?
I
Yeah.
mean, like if we get a like naturalistic slice of life Eternals, I would watch that. But I
Mhm.
don't know if the majority of MCU fans would watch that.
It's just like Kumail Nanjiani in the gym, right? Just like
Yeah,
getting his eight pack.
just getting like absolutely ripped, and then the struggles of just like royal family life. But
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Well, yeah, yeah. Like back to Nomadland, it's
yeah,
won a shit ton of awards. It's won a bunch of BAFTAs. It's won a bunch of SAG awards, Directors Guild awards, in the Indie Spirit awards. Everywhere, Golden Globes.
hmm,
So it goes without saying that they are the front runners for the Academy Awards, and Chloe Zhao might be the first Asian woman,
yeah,
at least of Asian descent, to win the Best Director at the Academy Awards, and I wouldn't blame them for it. Personally, like from last year, she probably wouldn't be my choice for best director, but that's a
hmm,
different argument altogether.
yeah,
Nomadland, it follows Fern, played by Frances McDormand, and she is this woman who is struggling after the economic collapse of a company town in rural Nevada where she lives. So now she has no job, she has no income. She decides to pack her van and set off on the road, exploring a life outside conventional society
hmm,
as a modern day nomad. And this film is it's devastating but also very insightful look into that subculture.
yeah,
It's actually a fictional adaptation of a non-fiction book by Jessica Bruder,
hmm,
and it uses Fern, Frances McDormand's character, as a lens through which to view this subculture of travelers, who live out of RVs and cars and pick up gigs as they move around the country. I
yeah,
mean, much like Fern, many of them are near retirement age, but without the option or perhaps inclination to retire. And instead of struggling to sustain what they once had, they've whittled down their needs. They're refugees of the last recession from 2008,
Mm-hmm.
and of rising housing costs, of a threat-based safety net, especially in America. And Chloe Zhao, who also writes the screenplay, like refuses to reduce them merely to byproducts of our increasingly callous capitalist system.
Yeah.
Whether through choice or whether through necessity, they've traded career grinds and the lure for the property ladder or career ladder, in exchange for a precarious but carefully guarded kind of liberation. One is that's supported by, perhaps, once in a while you package products in an Amazon warehouse, or
Mm-hmm.
you load beats onto trucks, or stuff like that. Yeah,
Yeah.
the gig economy lah. They are trying to throw off what one of the movement's spokespeople calls the yoke of the tyranny of the dollar. It's an interesting look into that subculture, and most fascinating of all, most of the nomads played in the film are non-actors. They're
Yeah.
actual real life nomads.
Mm-hmm.
That Chloe Zhao casted for the film. In general, what do you think about how Nomadland was presented, and the film itself?
It is a beautifully shot film, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like off the bat, a beautifully shot film, and I think like the cinematography, paired with the score, are two
Yeah.
of my favorite things. Absolutely favorite things. The uh, oh man, I okay. Let's not go into comparisons with the writer yet, since we haven't talked about it. But
Mm-hmm.
I think like we have some really really kind of like standout performances.
Yep.
Uh, Francis is amazing as Fern.
Mm.
There's just so much in her face,
Mm-hmm.
in kind of every given moment, and all these periods of like quiet contemplation where she's kind of on her own, and languishing in this like the isolation of her outsider status, right? Like despite the fact that she's starting to kind of integrate into the nomad society, or the commune that she finds.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's just so much there, and like Chloe Zhao just captures like all of it, right? And it's just kind of brilliant that way. I feel especially the conversations that she has with the nomads who play the nomads in the film
Mm-hmm.
are fascinating, absolutely
Mm-hmm.
fascinating. I think like there's one particular scene with Frankie in particular, just at the kind of like the budding stage of their friendship, right? That
Yeah.
is just absolutely riveting, right? Like I replayed that portion just because the way that it's framed, and the way that she's kind of like sharing her story, and how
Mm-hmm.
all her life on the road kind of came to be was just great great stuff.
Like, so real, right? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, right.
Yeah.
I all of that was really, really good. I did have a bit of trouble when David Stratheim comes into the
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
picture. Part of me is like he's gonna shout like Beltawala somewhere.
Yeah. 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 Yeah.
Because like he's so to me he's so so stuck in that role.
From the expense. Yeah.
Yeah, from the
Yeah.
expanse. But yeah, all around like great performances, like looks amazing, sounds great.
Mm-hmm.
It's quiet, it's contemplative, and I think like the meta narrative as a whole is so reflective of that kind of lifestyle. That it is very mesmerizing, right? To kind of like have a peek into that, because I don't think many people who are going to watch this film are going to have anything and experience anything close to kind of what's portrayed here.
Yes, yes, indeed. Like Fern, the character, is fictitious, but the world of Nomadland is very real, and the stories that the other nomads share are real stories. They're taken out from the book lah, by Jessica Bruder in
Hmm.
2017. Um, Bob Wells, one of the main characters in the film and in the book, is also is in the film lah.
Yeah.
And he kind of presides over a regular meetup called the Rubber Tramp Rendezvous, which provides a support system for modern nomads.
Hmm.
These are people who have opted out of traditional modes of living for a combination of reasons, and
Yeah.
you will learn about why sooner or later, to free themselves from the shackle of the dollar, as they say, to make the most of a fixed or limited income, especially around retirement age. It's such a great and non-didactic look at what these people are. They are
Yeah.
not just homeless. Like
Hmm.
they are. A lot of people say that they're homeless, and I guess to an extent it's true. Fern says that she's houseless,
Yeah.
but it's just a different way of life. And I think at first Fern chooses this way of life uh, because of a sense of not belonging. You get the sense that she is a person who's been discarded by society,
Mm-hmm.
by capitalistic America, but she can't just like do this lifestyle out of rebellion or something like that. In the end, she does change her mind and accept the nomad life as a lifestyle of its own, that it's fit for her.
Yeah.
She die doesn't want to settle down. And some nomads in the end do want to settle down, and that's fine with them. But
Yeah.
it's important for Fern's agency as a person, to live outside, to live in the margins, and
Yeah.
that's what Zhao does really well. She really depicts communities in the margins,
Mm-hmm.
with a sense of authenticity that is very potent and cogent,
Yeah.
and is chiefly character driven, and Fern is our character guide here, but Fern can come to represent a bunch of different nomads. What a fantastic film! All greatly acted. I think only David Strathairn and Frances McDormand are the only two professional actors in the film, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah. Exactly.
And they're great, of course,
Mm-hmm.
but I think like the real highlight of the film is the non-actors, who just give it their all.
Yeah.
Which is why a lot of people like to call Nomadland docu-fiction.
Yeah. Mhm.
And I sort of agree with that, and to a certain extent, The Rider is docu-fiction as well, because
Yeah.
it's just like recreating real circumstances in a fictional format.
Yeah.
Yeah, it has the feel of a documentary, but with none of the earnest flatness that mars even the most well-meaning documentaries. It has, I think, more in common with breathing, lived-in quality of novels.
Yeah.
The material has animated something in McDormand as well. She typically plays very big characters, very loud characters. Like if you've seen like Three Billboards and
Yeah.
stuff like that. And this is a nice chance for Frances McDormand to showcase that she can do the quiet too.
Mm-hmm.
There was a little worry that Frances, I mean, I don't think like, but there has been some complaints that Frances might have gone down the Al Pacino, who are big loud performances route.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
But
understandable given her previous roles.
yeah, but this it takes it back to Fargo and before,
Mm-hmm.
like and the radical non-conformity of the character and how she just feels so lived in, the assertive realness of the product and of the actor's determination, like really melts away any sheen of artifice that the viewer may have, to the point where you feel like you're watching a real thing, and
Mm-hmm.
to a large extent it is, yeah.
Yeah. Really, really good stuff. Yeah. Like I said before, like Swanky is my favorite character, I think. There,
Mm,
and it's just kind of like standout, right? Like what an earnest and well-meaning relationship, like how real that felt,
yeah,
how genuine she was with her concern for Fern's character
yeah,
and all of that.
yeah.
And even like what's the name of the kid? Like
Oh,
Derek?
right.
Is it Derek?
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
he's a real life guy also.
Yeah, the two moments that she has with Derek, right? I'm just like, wow, okay. Are
Mhm.
you sure these guys are not actors? Because like, like it is performance in such a different manner, right? Like what you can capture when it's real people kind of like playing themselves, like it's a vast, difference, I think. And we can talk a bit more about that in the Rider later on as
Mhm.
well, because it's kind of flipped, right? Because the main characters in the Rider are also non-actors or first-time actors, right?
Correct. Yeah.
And we don't have any the Rider. We don't have any professional actors, as far as I remember.
That's true, Like like one final take on Nomadland, I guess, is that it does a good job of not romanticizing the lifestyle
Yeah.
so much as giving you a truthful account of it. Yes, it is gorgeous and it is lyrical, and the piano score is great, and there's a certain beauty to Americana, the American Midwest.
Mm-hmm.
This slice of America that is sort of forgotten amidst the urban sprawl. But I think Chloe Zhao like really goes to great lengths and time to show us the difficulty of this life.
Yeah.
The endless laundromats, the cramped bed in the van, the cold, the possessions you leave behind, the shitting in a bucket by the side of the road.
One of the
So,
best lines, actually. We have to handle our own shit is one of my favorite lines from the movie.
Absolutely, and that's contrasted with the absolute beautiful cinematography of the American landscape,
Yeah.
it's almost a western in the way that the Rider is a western.
For
Yeah,
sure, for
yeah.
sure. Like some of the most amazing landscape views that I've seen recently, honestly.
Oh, 100%. Like, any final thoughts on Nomadland before we move on to its companion piece, The Rider?
The hype is real, right?
Mm.
I've got all my fingers and toes crossed that she will win because I think she deserves it.
Mm.
And I think we'll go into a fair bit of an interesting discussion, between like Nomadland, the Rider, and the key points and what we prefer.
Yep.
But like everything, all the awards she's won so far, like I'm super super stoked for her to get Best Picture.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
Moving on to The Rider, it follows a once, there's this guy called Brady. He was once a rising star in the rodeo circuit and a gifted horse trainer.
Mm-hmm.
This young cowboy named Brady, and he is warned that his riding days are over after a horse crushes his skull at a rodeo
Yeah.
in a freak accident. So back home on the Pine Ridge Reservation, with little desire or alternatives for a different way of life, Brady Brady's sense of inadequacy, mounts as he is unable to ride or rodeo.
Mm.
The essentials of being a cowboy, his identity is stripped. So, in an attempt to regain control of his own fate, Brady undertakes a search for a new identity and what it means to be a man in the heartland of America. Brady is played by Brady Jean. He's a real person.
Mm-hmm.
This is his story,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
exactly his story. It's almost a documentary, a docu-fiction, a presentation of his story, and it's fantastic. Brady as a non-actor carries this film in a way that I didn't think possible.
Yeah.
Um, it is just so fantastic. Again, it's kind of a different look at the American West as seen through the eyes of an outsider.
Mm-hmm.
And it fascinates me that of all people, this is someone from the outside, Chloe Zhao, who's born in Beijing, who's able to capture glimpses of America that Americans don't seem to want to talk about.
Yeah.
And that's my first impression of the Rider. I mean, of course, all the things that I said about Nomadland can be applied to the Rider as well. But like, let's begin with your thoughts, since you just recently caught this, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, Chloe Zhao binge obviously,
Yep.
recently for this particular episode. Brady completely bowled me over because I was so skeptical in the beginning of the movie,
Mm-hmm.
right? Like, I do feel like there were points in time that his performance, if we can actually call it that, was a bit uneven, right? Like, it did feel a bit forced. He was uncomfortable in front of the camera, but Chloe has this amazing way of like settling people into the lens that
Mm-hmm.
is at once unnerving to the audience but hypnotic at the same time,
Yeah.
right? And like she plays into this fact, like, and Brady has like these amazingly beautiful eyes,
Mm-hmm.
and she like focuses on them a lot, right? And so much of what I was taken by were just those quiet moments when he's not really like um interacting with other people. He's kind of in his own thoughts, or even his the time spent with his horses.
Mm-hmm.
um that really kind of caught me. I think for me, we keep talking about like this aha kind of like pivot point, right? These trigger moments that
Yep.
really sell a slice of life kind of naturalistic film like this to you. And for me, it was the point in time where he starts training horses again,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
And I thought to myself, like, there's no way to get that on film
Mm-hmm.
unless he's a real horse trainer, right? Like, you can train an actor all you want, and you can train a horse all you want, right? But you're
Mm.
never going to get that kind of bonding and relationship building that happens on screen. And
Yes.
then for in that moment, I was just like, okay, I totally like get why you don't have like a professional actor doing this, or a bigger name, some indie starlet like performing the role, because you
Mm-hmm.
can't capture that, right? Like that it's not performance at that point anymore, right? Like, it's a
Mm-hmm.
literal translation from real life into the medium of film that
Yeah.
is unique in that manner. And I was so like, it was just like, how do it's a moment of magic that requires so many things to fall into place at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like Chloe Zhao across the two films that we've been talking about, of hers that we're talking about, like consistently nails those time and time again. Whether
Hmm.
it's with the editing that she does, and I believe she edited those. Did she edit both?
Yeah.
Yeah. So like she basically did all the work on her own, right? Pretty
Hmm.
much. And I just don't know how she does it. Like it's just like it's like myth makers weaving, like she just weaves together these like incredible magical impressions and vignettes of moments that becomes its own story as it layers on each other.
Hmm.
And The Rider was just like I think is the epitome of that. I think a bit more
Hmm.
so than Nomadland, just because
Hmm.
everything there isn't put on, right? Like everybody there is at least a semblance or a real piece of themselves is portrayed within the film.
Exactly, exactly, and that's why I think The Rider is by a very slim margin a stronger film than Nomadland, although both are outstanding.
Yeah.
Like what's most miraculous about The Rider when I watched it a couple of years ago is just the jaw-dropping believability of everyone in its cast.
Mm.
Everyone is a non-professional actor, not just Jen Zhao,
Yep.
and
Yep.
and most of them are members of Jen Zhao's family,
Yeah.
or his friends or his neighbors. And Jen Zhao himself, it's such an absolute movie star, or at least he's framed that way, and Zhao is able to evoke the most from his soulful eyes, his reserved intensity. She
Mm.
draws the audience into his heartbreaking, emotional journey.
Yeah.
And the rider is in many ways like. I think I would have been upset if someone else played Brady because I think the rider is Jan Zhao's story to tell.
Exactly. Yes.
And he relives every moment of his terrible time in his life, with an unbelievable stoicism paired with a psychological depth that you can read into it. Like
Mm.
he is a young man who's raised in the tradition of the horse rider, growing up in a culture that prides itself on masculinity,
Yep.
pride in connection to nature, and the brotherhood of man. Without that, he's nothing. And Chandra instinctively conveys the anguish of that realization in ways that cut deeper than a put on performance.
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps it runs in the family, because the other Chandras and those around them do as much to bring these scenes to life. So much about the American Western are portraits of masculinity.
Yep.
And in Chloe Zhao's lyrical docudrama here in The Rider, that blends fact and fiction together. This is a look at American West masculinity in a way that is rarely covered because it's not sexy and because it's
Yeah.
perhaps dramatic.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
that's what makes it wholly unique, like in the same way that perhaps Hell or High Water is unique, or what's the other western I'm thinking of? Brokeback Mountain. Like different portraits of the American West masculinity, like that. That's not just the gritty, stoic, Clint Eastwood type
Mm-hmm.
in your usual westerns.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. That being said, though, like in a couple of months, I will be talking about traditional westerns, but so like no hate on the genre,
No.
lah,
No.
but
No. No. No.
it's just like nice to see a refreshing change of pace from that kind of things.
I think it's always like the genre itself will always benefit from having the fringe voices be more heard,
Yeah.
right? Like it fills out all these spaces. At least for me, right, and for you, like it helps us kind of like understand a more well-rounded perspective of the stories that fill that genre.
Mm.
So yeah, but I mean, looking forward to the Western episode.
Yeah.
There should be quite fun.
Yeah, I mean, the story of Reedy is just incredible. It's inspiring,
Yep.
but it's also heartbreaking. So much of him reminds me of extreme sports athletes, or
Mm.
boxers or MMA fighters, guys who just like can't accept that their body is broken because there's a genuine passion for what they're doing, right?
Yep.
And it takes, I think, I haven't seen this movie in like 3 years, but I think it takes his friend who is injured even worse than he is
Y-
to sort.
Exact same injury. I mean, like exact same mode of injury, but like he's paraplegic now.
Yes,
Um.
and that shows him like it could have been so much worse, and it could still be so much worse if he decides to go back at it.
Yeah.
But at the same time, he doesn't have to abandon horses. There are a lot more tranquil ways to be in touch with nature, to be part of a cowboy community,
Yep.
rather than risking another traumatic head injury. And I can say that also for a bunch of BMX riders or motocross people or MMA fighters, or that insane dude from Free Solo. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
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 Yeah, but like, what a great portrait of like someone who relies on your body. It's second nature to them, but your body betrays you. It's broken.
Yep.
Like I think another film could have turned Brady into something heavy handed, something kind of corny.
Yeah, for sure.
But this doesn't.
Yeah, I think the temptation for characters like that, or in stories like this rather, is to kind of like create a tragic hero, right?
Yeah.
Whereby they're aware of their flaws and all of that, but in the end they always lean into it, which is why I feel like the ending of this movie is so important.
Yes.
Because of the ultimate choice that he makes here, ultimately like is what makes the story real, right? Like at that point in time, if this were like your de facto like Hollywood film, right? If 20 years down the road they're like, oh, you know what, we're gonna do a remake, we're gonna cast fucking a de-aged Christian Bale, right? Or
Mm-hmm.
some shit like that, right? They would have, I mean, like the ending that we got wouldn't be the ending that I think most mainstream audiences will want,
Yeah.
because like it doesn't build onto the myth of that kind of like tragic hero.
Mm.
It is I think personally, a lot of the time, like the bittersweetness of this is the moments when he is in the process of becoming of accepting the fact that he will no longer be a cowboy,
Mm.
right? Like when he's teaching the young understudy, for example, and all like kind of these fringe things when people approach him in the grocery store and stuff like that. Like
Mm-hmm.
that process is so visible in such a subtle way, that
Mm.
I think for the audience, you don't, you are not surprised by his decision in the end, right?
Yeah.
And like I love that. It is such a rare thing to be able to see and track and
Mm-hmm.
come to terms with as the audience,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to him, like going for one last ride and breaking his neck. Yeah, so like so much to love about this film. I mean, I
Yeah.
totally understand. Having seen kind of both films, both this and Nomadland back to back, why Frances McDormand came to Chloe Zhao after watching The Rider,
Mm-hmm.
to work on Nomadland together.
Mm-hmm.
I it just makes sense, right? Like a story like this and the story like The Rider with all the amazing components that are in that, and the performances that Chloe manages to capture is just mind blowing. And it is no surprise that Nomadland is as good as it is and
Yeah.
has received as much acclaim as it has.
Yeah, yeah. Both The Rider and Nomadland, it fascinates me because this is coming from an outsider, and yet she captures a slice of um, the American landscape, Americana, the myth of Americana,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
And doesn't just romanticize it, although to a certain extent, the cinematography does encapsulate the beauty of it.
yeah.
But at the same time, it shows you the truth behind the myths. What real people are dealing with in their real lives.
Hmm.
Like it's not all like you see in the movies, and that's really what I love about Chloe Zhao, like the absolute lack of artifice in everything she does. I mean, of course, with the exception of her next film, but yeah, it makes it so perfect. The reason I felt like I loved the Rider before more than Nomadland is because I think I caught it before.
Yeah,
To me, like I already kind of knew what I was in for with Nomadland,
yeah.
so I wasn't as like wowed by it as most people who come into Nomadland not knowing Chloe Zhao's filmography, and I was just like, yeah, I've seen this before, and I've actually seen it done a little better, but yeah,
Hmm.
still both are great.
Yeah, yeah. I made specifically chose to watch The Rider first,
Mm.
because you were telling me that like, okay, your personal preference is The Rider, right?
Hmm.
And I thought like it makes sense to go chronologically.
Yeah.
I really wonder what my opinion would have been if I had gone the other way around.
Mm.
There is I really, man, I wish I had the time to watch her first film, and just kind of like see the trajectory of her career. But
Yeah.
yeah, I totally get what you mean with The Rider. There is just something. Uh, it is a much more fine distillation of her style, I feel,
Yes.
than
Yes.
Nomadland.
Hmm.
Right? Like this is kind of the moment in time within her career where you can point to and say like, yeah, this is it, right? Like this is what's going to be, what she's going to be known for. And then Nomadland just proves that on a much bigger stage. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm with you. I'm with you. I really do like these are two fantastic films. Nomadland deserves all the praise that it's getting, but The Rider is much like the film itself, like is a quiet kind of like celebration and contemplation
Mm-hmm.
of success and loss in a very small part of America, and like that's special, in so
Yeah,
many
yeah,
ways.
indeed, and kind of similar to The Rider and Nomadland and Chloe Zhao's filmography. The next two films as well are kind of very compassionate, fly on the wall, child's eye view of people living on the margins. I think
Mm,
the greatest strength of films such as this, slice of life films, is to bring you into the lives of people that you never think about, the hidden underclass.
yeah.
The injured cowboy, a nomad, homeless people, people living on the street, shoplifters, or whatever. And with the Florida Project in particular, directed by Sean Baker, it's again another like subversive chronicle of America's hidden underclass. and
Hmm.
and I think no film puts Sean Baker's empathetic eye and his country's impoverished fringes into sharper focus than this slice of life masterpiece. He had previously done another one called Tangerine, which is also very good. But I love this one a bit more. It's set in a shabby, lavender painted motel tucked just a few miles away from Disney World.
Yeah.
And the Florida Project, it paints a vivid portrait of a marginalized community trying to get by in the looming shadow of like this garish fantasy of the American dream, which is Disney World.
Hmm.
And although the motel is meant for tourists on a budget, in real life, as is in this film, the majority of its guests are actually low income transients, who are just in desperate need for roofs over their heads, living from week to week, from paycheck to paycheck.
Yeah.
This side of homelessness, much like the nomads, is something that you never see on the news because they're not homeless in the traditional sense.
Yeah.
And the shocking reality of the situation can be sobering. But unlike, I think, other filmmakers who sometimes emotionally condescend in their depiction of poverty.
Hmm.
Some people call it poverty porn. Um, Baker refuses to manipulate you into pity or blame. Instead, his kind of vérité approach immerses you into the summertime misadventures of the children who live there and who invent games and run amok through rundown parking lots and abandoned condos. Like it totally eschews the three-act narrative structure, and it plays out as a kind of a series of marvelous sketches,
Yeah.
rejoicing in the innocent playfulness of kids who are just concerned with the joy of being alive. And it's led by the devilishly cute 6-year-old Mooney, played wonderfully by the precocious Brooklyn Price.
Yeah.
These kids are mischievous, fearless, often defiantly bratty, but they find never-ending enchantment with the barest of means. And it brings me back to when I was a kid. like you didn't know what luxury was, whatever. Like
Yeah.
the world was as it was, and you find ways to have fun regardless of what it is. And this film is a bit like The Little Rascals meets like Francis Truffaut's The 400 Blows. It lets you experience the rapture and wonder through the capers of Mooney's friends, but at the same time, Baker is nimble enough to punctuate each instance of childhood delight with glimpses of their parents' harsh existence,
Hmm.
displaying particular emphasis on Haley, who's played by Bria Vinate, who also a non-actor,
Yeah.
who Baker discovered on Instagram. She is a Mooney's petulant, carefree, kind of morally questionable mother.
Hmm.
She's like this mess of contradictions. She's loving and fiercely protective, yet kind of shockingly negligent of responsibility sometimes.
Yeah.
And while it may be tempting to, I guess, simplify her as an unfit parent, I think the film's compassionate portrait of her and others as complete human beings kind of offers no judgment, only insight.
Hmm.
There's heartbreaking desperation there, but there's also warm ebullience, and they're all vital parts of the same experience. And it's such a graceful balance that makes the Florida Project so richly engaging, in my view. You recently caught the Florida Project as well. What do you think of it?
Yeah, so I was really excited because you've been harping on the Florida Project for like years now.
Yeah, a long time.
Yeah, it made your list in 2017, did it not?
Yeah, it did. It was in my top three.
Yeah, so you've been telling me to watch it for a while now, and then
Yeah.
I finally kind of like drummed up a reason to go and get that. Oh, I really really love this. I really love the Defoe's character here. It's one of my
Hmm.
favorite of his characters so far.
He won an Oscar for it, I think.
Y- Did he? Oh
Yeah,
yeah,
supporting actor.
supporting actor. Amazing stuff. Amazing stuff. Brooklyn Prince is such a precocious like treasure
Hmm.
here, and like the story all in all, it is it is amazing. I think especially the the through line kind of like like between the Florida Project and Shoplifters that we're going to talk about later is
Yeah.
the kids, right? Like and just um how much of the magic of childhood uh perseveres despite the harsh reality of the adult world like that surrounds
Hmm.
them, and I think the Florida Project, I think the way that Sean Baker has especially like focused on the kids and the kind of like world that they build for themselves, right, in contrast to Disney's grand vast machinery,
Yeah.
really really does. It is extremely nostalgic, like you mentioned, right? Like it reminds me a lot of my childhood. Not that I was exactly a kampong boy or anything,
Yeah.
per se, but there is so much uh there is so much to say about the imagination and about the optimism of being a child,
Hmm.
right? And the innocence of that is magical and continues to be magical up till the point whereby the adult world says no, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that is so painstakingly captured here.
Hmm.
When when the consequences of their play eventually kind of catches up with them, and the consequences of their parents' choices catches up with them, as well. That is incredibly heartbreaking.
Hmm.
And just like it's I don't know if I would watch this again, right? Like
Mm.
it is so good. It is so heartbreaking, but I don't know if I will watch it again because it's a lot to kind of like sit through.
Yeah.
And I think a similar thing can be said for Shoplifters as well, but in a wholly different way.
Definitely. Definitely.
So like not what I was expecting, I think. Just like kind of like looking at the way they described and all of that. It is a lot more, the human drama here is a lot more central than I thought it would be, right? Like there is
Hmm.
no grand kind of like um uh soapboxing about like, oh, the evils of like corporate America and the entertainment giant that is Disney and all of that. There's none of
Yeah.
that, right? Like it very simply takes a look and a snapshot of a place that, because of its proximity, makes the stories within it so much more salient and
Yeah.
juxtaposed to that kind of magic that is created, right,
Yeah.
by Disney. Yeah, it
Yeah.
is so good.
Definitely.
It says so much without having to say anything about that particular contrast at all.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, it's not beaten over your head, and to your point, like most of this film is kind of made up of like a sea of like brilliant but very raw
Mm.
newcomers.
Yeah.
And the only face that you recognize is Willem Dafoe.
Yeah.
And he himself also gives, one of the finest performances of his long and storied career. Like he plays the generous motel manager Bobby,
Yeah.
who runs the establishment like, a bit like the de facto mayor,
Yeah.
and also like an exhausted father.
Yeah.
His kindness means that his job extends far beyond general upkeep, and Bobby's unassuming decency is often I think the brightest spot of adult optimism here in a
Yes.
film like that's just filled with adult pessimism. I think it's the finely observed details of the Florida projects, like its bustling and vibrant community. It's kind of an intimate cinematic miracle.
Mm.
It's this amazing purple colored motel glowing in the humid Florida air. And I just say, like, the coloring in this film is amazing.
It
Like
is.
whatever filter they used, it just makes it look so
It
magical.
is. Like I don't. Yeah. It's kind of crazy, right? Like they do talk about the pain, like in the beginning of the film, and
Yeah.
in my mind, I'm just like, oh my god, seriously, all of that. But it plays into, um, into the magic of the children's like worldview, right? Like it's
Mm-hmm.
not just that there's the color of future land right next door. There's the
Mm-hmm.
color of the houses, the abandoned houses that they kind of go and play in, that has like this incredible like haunted house kind of like vibe inside,
Yeah.
and it's just it's such a subtle kind of way to weave in visually, the kind of like uh magic, I guess, like to make you feel like it's a lot more whimsical than the actual reality of the situation is.
Oh yeah, 100%, man, 100%. Yeah, yeah. Florida Project is amazing. I definitely encourage you all to watch it if you can. I think it recently was playing once again on the projector. I think once every few months they always like keep airing this film. I think they love it as much as I do. So yeah, you should definitely check this out. This is I think one of A24's like lesser known gems. But I mean to be fair, like the entire filmography of is
It's
is
stellar.
fucking
Yeah.
madness.
Yeah.
It's madness. Like there's not a single miss in that. Yeah, go check out the Florida Project and a much similar movie happening over in Japan,
Hmm.
directed by Hirokazu Kore-eda is follows a family of shoplifters running petty scams. It's kind of a modern day twist of on Oliver Twist.
Yep.
And it's again, it displays poverty without falling into the trap of being poverty porn. So this family of very poor shoplifters, after one of their shoplifting sessions, the father figure Osamu and his son come across a little gold in the freezing cold.
Yeah.
So at first they are reluctant to shelter the girl, and Osamu's wife agrees to take care of her after learning of the hardship that she faces.
Hmm.
So although the family is dirt poor, barely making enough money to survive, and their crimes are petty. These are not like Ocean 11 type heists.
Yeah.
They're shoplifters. They're petty criminals, and but yeah, they seem to live happily together until an unforeseen incident reveals a hidden secret that I did not expect.
Mm.
And it kind of tests the found family, the bonds that unite them.
Yeah.
Watching Shoplifters for the first time, what do you think of it?
uh okay, shoplifters has this very um it falls into a very particular category of Japanese film, I feel, right?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
Like there is a fascinating kind of look into, again, right, the fringes of kind of like society that is so far away from what you would understand to be polite Japanese society, of which the majority, you have your salaryman and all of that and your housewives and stuff. But it's a amazingly beautiful story about found family and just like the negotiation of human relationships between strangers that in the face of immense struggle, right, and poverty, and just kind of like making the best of what you can from here. Again, like I feel much like Florida Project, the performances of the kids are just like amazing stuff.
mm-hmm,
um and they kind of like carry through the entire thing. Yeah, yeah. The twist in the story completely caught me off guard. I think like
mm-hmm,
as we move into the third act of the film, there's so many things that I did not expect it to be. Like I don't
mm-hmm,
feel like it's not an immediately obvious setup from any portion from the first two acts, and
mm.
like for it to unfurl that way is kind of nuts, right?
Yeah.
Like it starts off with like, okay, they're struggling to get by, but they have kind of like a happy life. You kind of like grudging and kind of acceptance of this like ragtag group of people from all kind of different walks of life, with their own like tragic kind of backstories and things like that, of which
Mm-hmm,
we are not privy to until so much later, right?
mm-hmm,
But for the revelations to kind of unfold in that way, is really just like there's so many secrets that are being kept from other people, right? And
mm-hmm.
in that way, this little group of found family is so much more like a family than any of the other families that are portrayed in the film itself.
Yeah.
That it is both at once tender but yet so heartbreaking to
Mm-hmm,
to see that contrast, and on top of that, the fact that the story is about, you know, making ends meet, and living in kind of like this dire poverty whereby like shoplifting is the only way for you to get the amenities that you need, right? Think basic necessities that we take for granted,
Mm-hmm.
is a bit much emotionally, I will say. Like it really is. It really hits you in all these spots where it gives you so much of that that brand of like human empathy and kindness in the face of all of these things, that for it to unfold in the way that it did in the third act, right, it's just, well, it's absolutely devastating, I have to say. Like just the
Mm-hmm.
way it unfolds, in the way that, you know, they kind of like reveal all the secrets that are being kept and all of that, and having to see the characters of whom these secrets were kept from, right? I think
Yeah.
like Aki in particular, Aki's character in particular, when she finds out that her found grandma is actually her grandma,
Yeah.
I was kind of blown by that, right? Like not just the revelation of that itself, but the revelation to her and her response to that was
Mm.
just like mind blowing. That few scenes was really quite something.
Yeah, at first, like when I watched it, I thought, like, much like the Florida Project, it's kind of this like small film, that is a parable about happy and unhappy families.
Yeah.
What makes a conventionally family so much better than a found family. And it's just studded with memorable characters and believable performances. That like quietly lead the viewer to reflect on societal values, much like the Florida Project.
Yeah.
Like this tender ensemble piece, skillful performances. It just dovetails into a perfect like symphonic whole. So emotionally delicate, and so modest in its ambition.
Yeah.
That like when the twist hits, you're barely prepared for when the full force of the darkness that comes in, and it suddenly knocks you
Yeah.
sideways. Like all the clues though have been there all along, but it was not that kind of movie or that kind of show where like like a lot of like murder mysteries or whatever. I'm looking out for the clues, right? Like
Yeah.
I'm not here. You know so like I was totally unprepared for how dark the story got, but yet like kind of thanks to the characterizations, to the performances, it brims with so much humanity
Yeah.
that none of the revelations, right, change your fondness or sympathy for the protagonist. In fact, you may even care for them more, and you might even hold off judging what they've done.
Yeah.
um, and there's also like this like sharp critique of labor conditions which are not unique to Japan.
No.
That
Yeah.
is epitomized by like they talked about this new initiative called work share, right? So
Yeah.
basically workers are asked to alternate on half day shifts so that they're paid less. The result is, in Osamu's words, everyone gets a little bit poorer by the day.
Hmm.
So Osamu quibbles, stealing becomes the family's subversive form of work share, lah, as they call it. But like as the story progresses, right, the theft doesn't just involve taking money. It's a defining act of existence in an emotionally deprived world.
Yeah.
It's so good. It's so good. It's very similar to the Florida Project in that it is a child's eye view of a hidden underclass.
Yeah.
They're poor, they're kind of homeless. Similar to that, like, but unlike the other three films, the third act is a bit more narrative driven,
Yeah.
which doesn't make this a fully slice of life film, but for two-thirds of it is.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like that is a very kind of like Japanese thing. I feel in
Oh,
like
the big twist at the end,
the
yeah.
big twist at the end, like the third act, let me present to you a slice of life naturalistic thing, but I'm just gonna kind of like amp it up at the end of that.
Mm-hmm.
It is a very, very like kind of big part of Japanese cinema, or even anime for that matter,
Mm-hmm.
But like you're absolutely right. I think at no point in time did I feel that the actual like shoplifting itself was a big deal, right? Like at no point in
Yep.
time, like it is a fact that if they don't do that, life is gonna be that much harder, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like Shota's entire kind of like acceptance of the fact that what is it that Osamu says? That basically like if it hasn't been bought yet, it doesn't belong to anyone. Therefore, we can take it, right?
Right,
Like
right.
it's such a fucked up philosophy, right? Like
Yeah.
absolutely that isn't true, but it
Mm-hmm.
is so true at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
right? And for the entire kind of story to hinge upon his belief in that truth, quote unquote, of what his life is kind of built on, right? Like that, the way that it unfolds just makes it like so crazy. Like he makes decisions there, um, that I think are way beyond morally or ethically what a child of his age should be forced to choose. You know,
Yeah.
and that has consequences that are far wider and more impactful than he could possibly imagine. Like that entire choice sets off the rest of the third act itself, and it's
Mm-hmm.
just kind of mind blowing how that they weaved all of that into this very kind of like short third act. Um, it is so good. It is so heartbreaking.
Mm-hmm.
Um, shout out to Grandma,
Yeah.
Chloe.
Highlight
Um,
of the film. Yeah.
highlight of the film, by far my favorite character. Also, I believe this was one of what's her name, Kirin Kiki's last films before she passed away.
Yes. Correct.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so good, so good. Yeah, I think like all around they're such amazing performances.
Mm-hmm.
Within the family itself and even by the supporting cast.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Just fascinating stuff.
Mm.
The dialogue really kind of caught me, right? Like in these empty spaces between like trying to survive, where they have like these one-on-one conversations that feel so banal, but at the same time are absolutely fascinating, right? Because you are so focused on the fact that this is a family in poverty trying to survive
Mm-hmm.
that you forget sometimes that very human and strange conversations take place within that world as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think like that's kind of important, especially for the films that we've the four films we've been talking about today.
Mm-hmm.
Some of it as we are looking into an outsider's kind of world in these
Yep.
like very very small things, or even here when we're looking through the lens of kids in difficult circumstances, right?
Mm-hmm.
That it is far, it's not as much poverty porn,
Yep.
because you get to see the fact that these people are still human,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I think that's extremely important. And for me, a lot of those moments are what make Shoplifters and Florida Project like extremely well done, right? The fact that at the end of the day, you get to see that people are people regardless of the circumstances that they are in, right? There's a normalcy, or a
Mm-hmm.
need for normalcy despite um, difficult circumstances and the choices that they make and the consequences that they're after.
Yeah. Yeah.
Really, really good stuff. Completely taken by this. Shoplifters was really quite, um, I think, an eye-opening thing. Like I wasn't familiar with any of the actors here.
Similar.
Yeah, or even oh my, I don't wanna. I even the director's work. Like this is my first work that I've seen from him.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so like really, really solid stuff. And it's so strange. It's like
Mm-hmm.
for you to have picked both Florida Project and Shoplifters at the same time, like thematically and just how well they fit together as discussion points. It's kind of
I
crazy.
just subconsciously thought about it without intellectually thinking about it. Like
Yeah.
only when like I fired up Zencaster, I was like, hey, they're kind of they're kind of similar, huh?
Yeah.
Like, but like I just felt they belong together without knowing why. But like yeah lah, but it's true lah.
Yeah. It really does. It really,
You
really
know,
does.
like Shoplifters presents its characters in such a humanizing fashion, right?
Yeah.
That I don't even question the kidnapping.
No,
Like it's
no, no, no.
yeah, you
If
know.
I were in their shoes, I would have done the exact same thing, right? Like their concerns that it's kidnapping are absolutely valid, but I don't care. I
Mm-hmm,
absolutely do not care,
mm-hmm,
right? Because I think regardless of the situation your life is in, that decision is justified, right?
mm-hmm,
If I mean like it's kind of a decision, a kind of a passive decision to let her stay, rather than like the active decision to return her. Sure, by all means, but
mm-hmm.
again, with the shoplifting, with the kidnapping, with all of like even the burying and stuff like that,
Yeah.
I I understand, right? I
Mm,
understand why it is done, right? In most
yeah.
circumstances, you know, you wouldn't
Mm-hmm.
you wouldn't be so kind, look as kindly on those situations, but I understand.
Yeah.
And that is like, yeah, I think that really kind of like the way that the film is framed, really helps you to kind of like, and it's not, there's so much gray area when it comes to that, right? Like
Yeah.
in any other story, in any other social strata, if a story like this would have taken place, like, I would have felt differently for sure.
Yeah, like that's the importance of all four of his films. It's to immerse you into someone else's shoes,
Yeah,
to let you gain some measure of understanding and empathy
yeah,
and compassion for people you never think about. You don't tend to think about or have sympathy for the masculine conservative cowboy
yeah,
out in the American West, or you don't think about homeless people, whether they're in RVs or whether they're in motels, and you don't think about petty shoplifters who steal stuff. In fact, you are more likely to judge them.
yeah.
Um, I don't blame you. It's easy to categorize groups of people, but I think these films show you that you shouldn't. Everyone is a human being, and
Hmm.
and before you dare to judge them, perhaps maybe think a little bit about what their circumstances are, lah, and why they are the way they are,
Yeah,
and why they choose to do the things they do. And why they make the mistakes they make, and stuff like that. Like with the mom and Florida Project, for example. It's a complicated thing, lah, and not everyone is can be ascribed to the narrative of like who's a protagonist and who's an antagonist,
mm,
that kind of thing.
yeah,
Yeah, this is why I love like slice of life films. It reminds me a lot of books I read, like Pachinko, for example, and things like that.
yeah,
There's a certain like novelistic uh uh, approach into the deep dive of like everyday life that you
mm,
don't find in plot driven things, because plot driven things needs to focus on the plot
yeah,
and how everything intertwines together, and no this on that, like, that has its own value, but this also has its own value. And I think it's a shame that I think more mainstream audiences are perhaps unwilling to give this a chance, because I think if you have less a little bit of patience,
yeah.
you can. I ended with Shoplifters because I feel that Shoplifters is the perfect gateway into getting into the other
Yeah,
films.
for sure. I think like it strikes a very neat kind of balance between something that becomes plot driven at the end in a very interesting way,
Yeah.
but kind of like capturing you with the magic of seeing things as they are.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think, okay, just to your point
Mm.
about why a lot of mainstream audiences may not necessarily like this. It is hard, I think, sometimes. Okay, I like to think of it as an analogy between like real life and what you do every day and your Instagram kind of highlight reel, right? Like it's the same kind of
Mm.
concept, right? When we go and watch a movie, we want to see the highlights of that, right? We want to see the hero go through his trials, meet the guardian, blah 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 blah.
Yeah.
All seven stages of that, right? And to see him triumphant in the end, because that is a vast contrast to what our everyday lives kind of look like, right? It's the highlight reel. It is much more difficult to sit down and watch something that hits very very close to home to learn something from that,
Mm-hmm.
because so much of cinema is about escapism, right? Like the
Yes. Yeah.
cinema industry today is about escapism. It is why MCU and Disney and all the franchises that are coming out from there are what
Mm.
they are right now.
Mm.
Because yeah, I mean that is the nature of entertainment in this day and age, right? But cinema
Mm-hmm.
to educate, cinema to
Mm.
broaden minds, right? A lot of the time, it falls into the category of films that we've seen today,
Mm.
and all the documentaries that we've seen, and discussed about as well. I think it's a lot more difficult to find time to see
Mm-hmm.
something that you think reflects your own life a lot more,
Mm.
to find understanding and all of that. And to those of you guys listening, I don't mean in like a judgy or preachy way,
Yeah.
right? Like it doesn't mean that I enjoy these films, therefore I'm better, or anything of the sort. I just think that it's understandable that these don't get as much hype, or are not watched as much, or not enjoyed as much, just simply because like that's kind of what we want, right? We want our
Mm-hmm.
stories by and large to be fantastical, to be a form of escape.
Mm.
Yeah, but I mean, like, it's always good to have a balance with that. It is its own kind of catharsis. Films like
Mm.
this are their own kind of catharsis, and I
Mm.
think people are missing out if they don't at least give it a chance.
Oh, 100%, like to your point, like in the second half of the year, I was thinking about doing like some of, like Netflix's best nonfiction.
Yep.
And in this future episode, which is months down the line, I wanted to talk about about why people are so attracted to like garbage
Oh
documentaries on
my god,
Netflix.
are we talking specifically about Seaspiracy?
Yeah, that's the thing that inspired it, lah. But I mean, the documentaries we'll be talking about are good ones, lah, like intellectually rigorous, well researched kind of stuff, lah. You know.
Yeah, yeah,
But like, if you think about like what is number one last year on Netflix, which is Tiger King,
yeah,
some sensationalistic piece of trash. Then you have Seaspiracy, which barely does any research into the things that it's proposing.
yeah,
You know, like, why are people attracted to this? And Seaspiracy offers you a kind of like, oh, a false measure of hope that if you do this and this and that, like, you can change this industry and
yeah.
save the world and the animals. And Tiger King offers you an escape from the reality of the fucking murders that happen. You know, like, you fail to think about the prison industrial complex. You think about the American justice system and how it plays into those things. You know,
Yeah.
so it's so frustrating that there are actually good documentaries out on Netflix, and yet people choose to watch these kind of things.
But I mean, like these things are fed to us, right? Algorithmically.
Correct. Yeah.
Immediately, like I have absolutely not anything watched anything remotely close to Conspiracy on my Netflix. Right?
Mm.
The majority of the stuff is like, blockbuster films, anime, animation, indie house films. Yeah, sure. But I get fed that anyway, right? What was the
Yeah.
other kind of like pro vegan sports thing that we got a couple of years back on Netflix as well? And then it turned
Mm.
out that the producers, the people who bankrolled the film, basically owned owned like this vegan sports supplements company.
Right. 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 Yeah. Stuff like that. You know.
Yeah, right. Like we're fed that because it's sensationalist rubbish, right? But it
Yeah.
makes a lot of money and it makes a lot of waves.
Mm.
And because of that, we get fed it anyway, right? Like,
Yeah.
yeah, I totally understand that. Like, wow, there's actually a lot to kind of dig into in terms of like the human psyche and how we feed off that kind of like media coverage and the
Mm-hmm.
simplification of like very very complex problems that we
Mm.
face in the world today. Yeah, I mean, we could go
Yeah.
for hours on just talking about that, but I'm definitely down. I
Mm.
haven't watched outside of the documentaries that we covered recently for Behold, I haven't actually watched
Mm.
any kind of like solid documentaries recently.
Oh, sweet. Yeah, yeah. Like, probably in August or September, when I've run through, we have like already like a slate planned, lah. But like coming in this year, like, we'll talk about Netflix nonfiction that is actually good,
Yep.
that actually does research, that you know. And sometimes a lot of people, like, when they see stuff like 13 for something like Eva DuVernay's documentary, it's like, oh, so
Mm.
many numbers, so much context. Why do I have to consider criminals as people? Why can't I just, like, have a little? Why can't I just laugh at the absurdity of like Carol Baskins, or something like that?
Yeah.
Anyways, yeah, like, I've gotten off topic, but we'll talk about it soon. Coming up next week is Genre Equality 41,
Mm.
where the main topic is the Falcon and the Winter Soldier. We'll also be talking about Invincible, Infinity Train, Yasuke, Mortal Kombat, amongst others. As well, I'll be talking about Joss Whedon right at the end, about how I kind of have to reevaluate my fandom of him. And I'm going to tie that into a review of HBO's Nevers, which is Joss Whedon's latest show.
Yep.
Of course, we're going to be spending the bulk of the time on the Falcon and the Winter Soldier, which airs its finale this week.
Mm.
Very excited for that. One
Yes.
of MCU's best offerings.
Yeah.
And although, like, I keep trying to think, I keep thinking that it's like such a special show, but to be honest, the Falcon and the Winter Soldier has carried on from the real world political thrillers of the Captain America films. It's
Yeah.
of the same vibe.
Yeah.
So it's actually not so different or special, but it continues to blow my mind.
Yeah, it does. I think the format in which we're receiving it right now, right? Like it
Yeah.
in of itself, these 6 episodes that we're getting, it's its own
Mhm.
movie within that mini franchise within the greater MCU, and
Mhm.
it's so good. It is so good.
Mhm.
Um, it has everything that we expected of it and more. And I think I can't really kind of like discuss like the finer points of that 2 weeks from now.
Definitely, man. Like, this is not the type of show like WandaVision where people are making like, like, guesses, like, who is Mephisto, that kind of
Yeah,
thing.
yeah.
The Mephisto watch absolutely like burnt out on WandaVision. So I'm just gonna say that I think Sharon Carter is Mephisto. No, she's a power breaker for sure,
She's the
right?
power broker for sure. Yeah, like hands
Yeah.
down. I really want to see if they resolve that next episode because I don't know
Mm.
if they will.
Yeah.
Yeah, something about like it is not a mini series; it is a drama series. So
Hmm.
this is likely to continue on, and which I'm more than happy for it to go.
Yeah,
But yeah,
yeah, yeah.
yeah, I really
Yeah, I
love
mean,
where MCU TV is at the moment. It's very very solid.
of course, we got Modok coming next month. We got Loki coming the month after. We got Black Widow. We got Shang-Chi. We got Eternals. We got Spider-Man, No Way Home. All that coming in the next, let's see, 8 months.
Yep.
I just listed like 6 or 7 titles there. It's pretty insane. So can't wait for it. Till next time, guys. This has been Hit Zero.
I'm Isa.
Goodbye.
No.